president played more important role. Then we've had the development to more parliamentarian system. From the mixed constitution to parliamentarism, it might be interesting to hear about some issues about this development. After 3 decades of constitutional debate and many small reforms and preparatory works, the Parliament passed the new constitution in 1999, practically unanimously. The great shift of political culture, we have many disagreements in Finland, was evident in the fact that the opposing party ideologies did not collide in the course of this process. It was a unified spirit in our society at that time. The first 3 sections of the Constitution of 2000 define the political system of Finland as a republican parliamentary democracy, the principles of popular sovereignty and representative government, the principle of rule of law, and the status of the highest state organs and their general fields of competence have been defined, of course, in the Constitution in accordance with the regular functional 3-way separation of powers. It's very essential feature in Finnish Constitution, separation of powers. Concerning the parliament, the Finnish parliament is characterized by its unicameral structure. Actually, the Finnish parliament was maybe the first modern parliament in the world since 1906, when we got the general right to vote and general right to be elected. Parliament functions as a multi-party forum for fundamental national decisions. Party pluralism is ensured by the electoral method with proportional representation and large electoral districts. The main task of the Parliament is to exercise the legislative powers, of course. One of the important constitutional changes also was for strengthening the parliamentary aspect. It is now the Parliament that elects the Prime Minister. The role of the President is limited to the formal appointment of the Prime Minister and, on the proposal of the latter, the other ministers. The new government must submit its program to the Parliament immediately after being appointed. This procedure opens the doors for, let's say, broader public debate on the policies to be adopted. The Parliament has no role in appointing or dismissing judges, nor has it competence to give recommendations how an act should be interpreted. Likewise, the Parliament cannot intervene in court proceedings in a single case, but of course can steer legal development by amending laws. So Parliament is concentrating to make laws and that way steer legal development. The cooperation of the government. The Constitution binds nowadays the President operatively to the government, and we can say that in the Constitution of Finland, the parliamentary aspect of presidential decision-making has been reinforced in 2 ways. On the other hand, it has been made more difficult for the President to diverge from the proposal. In the context of current Finnish debate on the possible need for constitutional reform, I have presented, and I can repeat it here, a position where the President's duties would be retained, but where the procedures would be further developed. This would mean that In the event of a disagreement, the President would ultimately be bound to the position of the government. With its requirement of parliamentary confidence, this would constitute the main rule. Of course, there will be some derogations. As a role model, also in other respects, the participation of the President in decision making has a balancing effect as well. Concerning the government, some few words. The government or the Council of Ministers has a straightforward composition. There are a Prime Minister and at most 17 ministers, a quite, let's say, tiny government actually. There is also an independent judicial appointment board established by an act which prepares and makes the proposal on an appointment to the permanent post of other judges. Majority of the board members represents the judiciary. The right of judges to remain in office is guaranteed in the Constitution. A judge shall not be suspended from office except by a judgment of a court of law. So government or parliament has no power to involve, and the remain system of offices is guaranteed by these court proceedings. Some few words at last, control of constitutionality and legality. There is a novel emphasis on the primacy of the Constitution in our Constitution, and it means that the courts must give primacy to the provision in the Constitution if the application of a provision in a regular act would be, in case at hand, in evident conflict with it. This is important change from earlier principle, so that the constitutional control lies nowadays on all the courts, and not only in parliamentary actions. There are, of course, many states, especially federal ones, which operate specific constitutional courts. Even though this solution offers a clear mechanism for the control of the constitutionality of legislation in actual cases, it may also involve some problems. Such problems include the disengagement of constitutional issues from all other norms of judicial decision-making, delays in issues of rulings, and controversies regarding the composition of these constitutional courts. I would be, let's say, very careful to recommend such kind of models, separate constitutional courts. My last point before timetable is over on my position. Well, let's say some humoristic here also. Once I was in a conference in Finland and had spoken quite a long time, and I didn't have any watch with me, and I asked you, do I have time to continue? One older gentleman behind the others stand up and say, that kind of speaker don't use and need any watch, you need a calendar. I will finish by saying that although the constitutions in all the countries have been concretely formulated and the importance of these constitutions increased, the main thing, nevertheless, is to continually develop legislation, good governance, and access to justice in practice. So to have a constitution more closer to daily life. And for that reason, I've been thinking that rule of law is like a house built on solid ground. Like a house, it has four corners, like here in this room. It's a principle of legality in the exercise of power. The second corner is balance, separation of powers between state organs. And the third one is respect the human rights and duties of citizens. And the fourth corner is a functional corner, so that we do not need theories. It would be more pragmatic, good guidelines, so that the constitution and judicial system is real from the point of view of ordinary citizens. Dear friends, I have tried to make a few remarks about the Finnish constitution. I know that constitutions, they can't be exported, but we can always change opinions, what kind of experiences we've had in different countries. And I would say that the tension between the governmental powers and parliamentarism has loosened when the constitution has been amended in our country. The role of parliament and the government, which has to enjoy the confidence of the parliament, has been strengthened. The parliament has a decisive role when government is appointed. The powers of the president have been diminished, and the use of power is bound to the opinion of the government. The rule of law and separation of powers, so the legislative, governmental, and judicial powers are followed. This is very important to take care of separation of powers and also same time have some harmonized whole picture of the functioning of the state organs. And the last point is that the constitution has become closer to the people. That is very relevant point, so that constitution is not only for state institutions, constitutions is for whole people. Nepali people, Finnish people, and constitution are, that is our constitution and your constitution. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Of course, constitutions cannot be exported or imported, but they can be a good reference material for others. And so that way, we in Nepal have been very keenly following your experiences in Finland and other Nordic countries, especially your method of proportional representations, whereby various groups of people, women in our case, the so-called untouchable caste, Dalits, oppressed section of the people, can be included in the governance of the country. So that way, the models being followed in the Nordic countries have been keenly studied in Nepal, and they should be a good reference material for us. Now, I will request Professor Rohan Edrisina from Sri Lanka to make his presentation.
Begin by thanking you, Mr. Chairman, and the organizers of the conference for inviting me to speak this morning. We in Sri Lanka watch with very keen interest the constitution-making process in Nepal. Those of you who are familiar with constitutional and political developments in Sri Lanka will know that we have been struggling for the last 15 years to change our constitution. And whenever we've tried to, our process has been flawed. Our process has not been half as participatory or as inclusive as your process has been. But we live in hope, because in 10 days' time, we're having a very crucial election in Sri Lanka. And if there is a change of government, then it is very likely that there is going to begin again a process of constitutional reform. And then we will look to the developments in Nepal in the last 2 to 3 years for inspiration and guidance. I'd like to share with you the Sri Lankan experience on one of the topics that I'm led to understand the Nepal process has struggled with. And I'd like to, if I may, in the same spirit that Bob Ray referred to, highlight the dangers of the presidential system through the Sri Lankan experience. In our 61 years of independence, we had the parliamentary executive model for 30 years, and we've had the presidential executive model for 31 years. So I do think that Sri Lanka offers a very good case study for you as you debate this question of whether you should have a presidential executive or a parliamentary executive. I might also remind you that Bangladesh had a similar debate and had a brief flirtation with the presidential model and then went back to the parliamentary executive model. I have used deliberately in the topic of my presentation the phrase perils of presidentialism, which is the topic of a seminal article written by Professor Juan Linz, the Sterling Professor of Political Science at Yale University, in a seminal article that he wrote in 1990 in a journal called the Journal of Democracy. And though it was written a long time ago, I think the literature and the scholarship that has followed has sort of critiqued the Linz thesis somewhat, but has really not challenged the basic argument that Professor Linz made in this article, The Perils of Presidentialism. And I would like to suggest that the members of the Constituent Assembly and civil society